Okay, I'm looking for my record button.
I did it already, Maggie.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Oh, I see that. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Maggie. I am the Undergraduate Services Coordinator at the Writing Hub, and I'm happy to be here to present to y'all today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Jackie, for having us. I'm Susan Rinaldi. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Director of the Academic Achievement Hub in the Teaching and Learning Commons.
And I'll just introduce myself really quick because I also dove right in just to share a little bit of Transfer Appreciation Week when we got started. But hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Dewar. I'm the Program Manager for Transfer Student Success. And we're really excited to have the Achievement Hub and the Writing Hubs here. Many of y'all are new students, or maybe you're continuing and you're saying, what am I doing in this world right now, in this online world, in this virtual world, in this quarter system, in this 10-week fast-paced new life that we're all going through. So we're really excited to have the Achievement Hub and the Writing Hub here to talk to you. And so with that, thank you both for being here. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Maggie. And I apologize that we're doing our announcements at 12 minutes again, and now we're recording. So go ahead and keep going, Maggie. Thanks again for the quick pause there.
So I'm just going to say quickly that we believe that writing is really a way to think through something. Writing is a tool for learning, no matter what genre, topic, or major. And you can count on the Writing Hub to help you with any stage of the writing process, with any type of writing project. And we offer 2 types of appointments, either synchronous or asynchronous.
Okay. Good afternoon again. So for the Academic Achievement Hub, what we do is we really have multiple services and programs that really help you master what you need to become efficient learners. There's a lot of programming that's content-based. We also serve students in like their background knowledge for learning, but what we're going to be discussing here is really a program of ours that is with Learning Strategists. And when we think of time management, it really is about becoming efficient in your learning. How do I use resources that support what I need to learn and to meet my learning outcomes for not only the course, but now in your majors? Because you definitely are on that path, not just to be a continuing student, but looking forward to what you're going to be doing professionally and or grad schools.
So what we really, we want to be really clear with what you can get out of this workshop and what you can get specifically out of our program and Susan's program. So you might be asking yourself, how can these 2 resources that seem pretty separate help you manage the rigors of the university quarter system? So here's how we believe it'll help you. Using these 2 resources will help you assess what you already know, and will help you understand the expectations of your course, which is so important for meeting those expectations. You have to know what your expectations are before you meet them. You can use both of our resources to help you develop a more productive and effective mindset. And lastly, and this is no small feat, to hold you accountable. Accountability really is the thing that can pull you through hard times. So that's what we really think, that's one component that we think could be really helpful to students. So what you'll get out of this workshop, you'll get a reframing of how to approach writing projects, strategies on how to extract essential information with your readings. We're going to talk about, Susan's going to talk about the difference between note-taking and note-making. And then we are aware of how monotonous it is to just sit there and retain information. So we have designed activities for you as models for future efforts. Okay, so we're gonna go just to the writing portion of this workshop. So before we get started, let's examine what your writing process is now. So I want you to just take like a minute or 2 to ask yourself this question. How have you been taught to write academic essays in the past? What do you know about the writing process? And how has that shaped the way you approach your writing? So just think about those questions for just a minute. Okay, let's think about how writing was taught to you before you came to UCSD. So I'm making a leap in assumption a little bit because I feel like this is so widespread, but did your education in writing academic essays look something like this? So you have an introduction, it gives background, you state your thesis in the intro, you have 3 body paragraphs, they all tie back to the introduction in some way to the thesis, right? And then it concludes by summarizing the main ideas, and then you restate your thesis. Just by show of hands for those who are on camera, does this look familiar? Does this ring true to you in some way? Yes, okay. So another way to think about that style of writing, so you have your thesis, you have your body paragraphs, and all of them just really support the thesis, right? So there are definitely pros to this structure. So the organizational expectations are really clear. So as a writer, you know what you're doing. Everything that you're writing is ideas to support the thesis. It helps you focus on only a few main ideas. And there's a smaller possible margin for misunderstanding between writer and reader. It's very clear what the reader is gonna get. It's very clear what the writer is gonna write. So there are definitely pros to this 5-body paragraph structure. But there are definitely disadvantages, right? It limits your creativity. It just becomes like a formula and you just plug stuff in. It only really lets you explore one type of relationship, and that relationship is mostly agreement or support of your thesis. It doesn't let you explore other relationships. It encourages a linear writing process, which is just like point A to point B to point C. It doesn't really let you explore and think of new ways to think about a certain topic. And it can feel really monotonous and not interesting to write or read. So what we want you to think about is this is not the only way to write academic essays. So I know you were thinking like, this is how I was taught in high school, or this is how I was taught at my community college. But really, it's going to require a shift in thinking about writing when you come to UCSD, because it's not going to be about the 5-paragraph structure. It's going to look more like this. So you have your thesis, and instead of a body paragraph, you have a main idea. Main idea supports the thesis. You have another main idea, and it complicates the first idea. You have a third idea, and it has nothing to do with the second idea. It actually challenges the first idea. Your next idea could expand on main idea 3, and then your last idea qualifies the idea before it. So what I really want to show you in this slide is that you'll be invited to explore new, more interesting types of relationships. You won't be confined to that 5-paragraph structure and just that one type of relationship. But it's hard to write like this. You don't just write like this in your first draft. It's a process. It takes time. So then making a checklist becomes a little bit more complicated. So it's not just about, okay, now I have my intro, I have my transition, I have my thesis statement, my body paragraphs, everything looks good. This is a good paper. It's going to be more complicated than that. You're not just going to be able to come up with a checklist and be able to check things off. So what we want you to invite you to do is to think of writing as a process, not as a product. So let me dive into that a little bit more. What does it mean when I say writing as a product? So writing as a product is your finished text, right? It's the thing that you turn in. It's the thing that the readers interact with. You all have heard the saying, I feel like the saying is well known enough. It's like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? That's kind of similar to this. So it's not about the destination, which is the product, it's about the journey, it's how you get there. So that's what I'm talking about with process. So writing as a process is the thinking that occurs in the steps that takes you to get to that finished product. Are you being intentional about those steps? Are you being mindful about those steps? That's what the writing process, that's where it helps you learn, right? Because if you're just thinking of writing as a product, then you're just like, I just want the A, this checks off all of the things, this fulfills the requirement, and that's it. That's a really myopic way to think of learning. So we really want to shift your thinking of like, okay, what is the process of writing? What's going to allow me to get to the product that I'm proud of at the end of this process? So we want you to think of writing as a learning tool of your thought process. Writing is truly a mechanism for helping you think. So you have to know what is expected of you before you can determine how long it will take you to finish the writing process. So what we mean by this is, who are you as a writer? Maybe this is a question that you have never considered before. Why would you? You know, in high school and community colleges, they give you a writing assignment, you fulfill it, they give you a grade, you're done. You don't really get this time to think about yourself and reflect. But this is the time. You are here in this workshop. We appreciate your time and your attention. And this is the time we want you to think, yeah, who am I as a writer? So first, know the components of a writing process to see how you relate to them, to see how you are as a writer. So there's a lot of things that go into the writing process. So it can include breaking down the prompt. So a prompt just seems like, again, another checklist, but really there are implicit directions in there, things that they want you to be thinking about. So how do you break down the prompt? There's pre-writing. So what are your initial thoughts? There's brainstorming. What are the thoughts surrounding this prompt? There's outlining, there's drafting, there's revising, there's editing. As you can see, there are many phases of the writing process. And we're really conditioned to think that we can just sit down and bang out like 5 pages and that will be a good essay. But really it's if we want to write a good essay, it requires so many more components. So when we say discover who you are as a writer, we're saying, how long does it take you to brainstorm? Or what aspect, what phase would you really enjoy of the writing process? So it's been a long time since I've written an academic essay, but I'm a creative writer. And I have a lot of fun actually in the brainstorming. Like I just like putting all of my thoughts down. I like the bullet point list that I make. I like connecting things. And I think I just kind of like word vomit, and then I really like revising and editing. So that's how I know myself as a writer. There are all these different phases, and this is what I like. This is what I kind of know that I need to power through. And then this is what I really enjoy of the writing process. So know yourself during the process. How long does it take you to understand the prompt? How long does it take you to brainstorm or do an outline or write a first draft? Any of these things. This is where time management comes into play, right? In terms of the writing process, you can't manage your time unless you know know yourself well enough to know what's going to take you longer than other areas. So in our first activity of this workshop, we're going to take a look at this. How long does it take you to understand the prompt? So here you are, you're a blank slate, you get a writing prompt. And again, like I said, it could be very tempting to just look at it like a checklist, like a list of things that you need to do to write a good essay. But there are questions that you can ask yourself to help you see the implicit instructions or the ideas that the instructor wants you to contend with. So here are those questions. So what ideas is the assignment asking you to contend with? What are like the main things coming up in the writing prompt? Who is the audience? I feel like this is a question that gets overlooked. We're gonna dive deeper into this question, but yeah, who is the audience? Is it the TA? Is it the instructor? Is it a peer? Is it a lay person? That means whoever the audience is, it means you approach your writing in a different way. Ask yourself, what is the purpose of this assignment? It can feel really arbitrary, writing assignments, like what's the point of this? But if you force yourself to think about that and how it ties into the rest of the course, that will give you a broader understanding and kind of give you something to buckle down with, right? And so it doesn't feel so arbitrary. You need to ask yourself, what steps do you need to take to fully engage with the material? And another question, what are you expected to learn from this specific assignment? This really takes you kind of into the bigger picture. It's very similar to the question, what is the purpose of this assignment? Because once you have context, it helps you make more connections and it doesn't feel like it's such a random assignment. So we're gonna go into the next activity. So I'm gonna have you read a bit. So go ahead and take 2 minutes to read this prompt. Okay, are we good? Do we need a little more time? Okay, I'm gonna take that as we're good. Okay, so let's look at this prompt. So I'm just gonna read it out loud one time. In this second major writing assignment, you will choose to analyze either Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club or Mary Gaskell's Secretary, and the film adaptation based on the literary text, Fight Club in 1999 and Secretary in 2002. Your analysis will focus on camera work, lighting, sound, editing, and/or casting and its effect on the narrative. You will make an argument, thesis claim, about how cinematic choices affect issues of gender, race, sexuality, literacy, or another social concern in the original literary text. In other words, this is not an essay simply about the film. You will use at least 2 sources from the course, readings, or lecture material to support your argument. You will also incorporate at least 2 film images into your essay. So I don't know about you, but I read that and I feel super overwhelmed, right? There's like, what am I doing? There's this book, there's this movie, this other movie, this book. It's asking me to look at all of these things. So it's really overwhelming. It's really hard to know where to start. There just feels like a lot of directions and not a very clear spot to start, right? So I'm gonna invite you to look at this prompt through the lens of those questions that were asked. So in an ideal world, I would get feedback from y'all about these questions. I'm just gonna walk through how I would read through this prompt because I'm mindful of the time and the material we have for the rest of this presentation. So you see this prompt and you need to break it down to make it more manageable, right? To make it more approachable, because right now it's pretty unwieldy. At least that's how it feels to me. That's my reader's response to it. So first I'm gonna ask, what is the purpose of this prompt? What is it asking me to do? Because initially it might be like, oh, it's just asking me to write about these movies or these books and like prove that I read them or prove that I watched them. That's like a very natural, instinctual feeling, but it's actually not doing that. If you look closer, you look at what is it directing you to do? What is the task that it's asking you to do? So focus in on where it says really clearly, your analysis will focus on camera work, lighting, sound, editing, and/or casting. So it really wants you to contend with the effects, right? The effects of these different elements of movie and how it affects the narrative. It's also asking you to analyze. So a purpose of the prompt is, can you analyze a work? Can you analyze a movie? Can you analyze a book, right? So that's a little bit different than tell what happened in this book or tell what happened in this movie. It's encouraging to think about these cinematic components and how it affects the story in these different forms, either in movie or in a text. And it's asking you to understand the elements of constructing an argument when it comes to film and literature, right? So asking yourself, okay, what is the purpose of this prompt? So those are a couple of things that I pulled out from the prompt. A good next question to ask is, who is the audience? So do you feel like it's clear here who the audience is? Yes, no? Yeah, to me, it doesn't feel clear at all. So this is something to be mindful of. This is something to ask your instructor about, ask your TA about. You want to be clear on this because it really changes the way you approach the writing, right? The way that you write to a peer is going to be different than the way that you write to an instructor. So understanding the audience is really key for unpacking a writing prompt. It's asking what ideas are you, does it want you to grapple with? And it has a really long list here. It has issues of gender, race, sexuality, literacy. And so those are the things it's stating really clearly. These are the ideas that it wants you to grapple with.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? I'm so sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
How would you, can you reiterate or kind of expound on how would you write differently for a TA versus your teacher?
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good question. So if the audience were a TA, the TA already has context about the material that you are going over, right? Like they might know the movie already, they might know the book already because you've talked about it in class. So it would reprioritize what you write about. So maybe you're not giving so much background, you're focusing more on analysis. But if this prompt were like, say you are trying to convince a person off the street that this movie is the best movie there is, then it's different. Then you have to explain the movie. Then you have to be like, this is why it's good. So that's what I mean. And I feel like this is such a good question. So thank you for asking that. But that's what I mean. It's overlooked because you think initially like, why does that matter? Like if you're just writing an academic essay, but when you think about the perspective they're coming from, it does really change the way that you approach your writing. Does that answer your question? Cool. Okay, so what steps do you need to take to fully engage with the material? So that's a really good way to break down the prompt, right? Because like I said, you read this and you're like, what am I doing? There's so much going on. So I'm gonna just like try to unpack like, okay, it's asking me to choose one or the other, right? It's not asking me like read all of it, watch all of it. So it's like choose either Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club or Mary Gaskell's Secretary, and then the film adaptation based on the literary text. So I'm either looking at that Chuck Palahniuk's work or Mary Gaskell's work. So I understand like, oh, I have a choice here. I'm not expected to read all of this. So that also helps you in your time management. Like, what is it that you actually have to do? You don't have to do everything, right? And lastly, a question for you to consider is, what are you expected to learn from this specific assignment? And this might seem like a random question. What does this have to do with me actually writing anything? But when you are able to answer this question, what are you expected to learn from the specific assignment, and connect it to the rest of the course, things just become a little bit clearer in terms of what it wants you to do, how the instructor expects you to develop as a writer in the class and a thinker in the class, right? So when you're able to connect it to the bigger idea of what is the course talking about, what is the course about, then this will help you kind of narrow down your writing approach, because you know what the instructor is expecting of you, what they want you to learn from this assignment. So apologies that that was a little bit didactic and it was just walking through, but I do want to say that this approach might seem like it's only applicable to writing, and I'm going to pass it over to Susan to show you how this approach to unpack, how you can use this approach to unpack other types of texts.
Okay, so I think first I'm going to ask, because I think there are a lot of you that were looking for what is time management. So I'm going to talk about that first, and Maggie gave a great segue here about how to look at prompts. Prompts are everywhere. So if you think about if you are taking a STEM course, psychology, sociology, your prompts are every day. Your instructor may say, read this chapter, read these pages, read this primary resource before you come into class. And at your level, you're going to have more courses, I hope, that are smaller, or even your discussion sections. So you have to find a way to manage time so that you can actually find the time to make it through all of those resources, so that you can show up in those spaces and really contribute, but also so that not only your contributions, but as you're listening to others, did you call out that kind of important information? Was that what you interpreted from those readings? So Maggie's given you this approach because any one of those pieces, whether it's a lab report, a prompt that you're going to see for homework, are things that writing mentors can help you start to unpack. Now, if they are discipline specific, like, oh, it's a math course or it's biology, we have a lot of, with the Academic Achievement Hub, tutors that you can bring that prompt to. And so I'm calling it a prompt because they're word problems, right? They usually are. And you want to come in and unpack that. But then in the readings, you have to do some things. So that's where we're going to go next. We didn't intentionally sit here and just map out and talk to you about calendars. I'm sure you're at this level, you're highly successful students, and that the calendars, I'm sure you've already mapped out what day of the time, what day and time your courses are, and all the other components. But what do you do when you actually sit down now and first have to manage the reading for the course? That's where we're going to go next. And if you still have questions about making time for your courses and doing those things, please do meet with a learning strategist. They're on aeh.ucsd.edu. You can make one-on-one appointments as well. And we'll be hosting other workshops for you all in the future too. So you can look us up for those. Okay. So we're going to we have a short period of time. I'm going to try to get through this. So I just wanted to give you something funny to think about. Okay. Why note making and not note taking? I want to move you all from thinking about being a scribe in the classroom. I'm sure you don't, and really being an active participant when you sit down. And I really know, I appreciate that you are all here at UC San Diego and you're participating in this remote world. And I bet a lot of your instructors have created recordings of your lecture material. You still want to be highly attentive. You want to be able to sit down and say, okay, if I just have 5 million things open, I'm really not paying attention. But you also don't want to get in the habit of trying to write every word. Hopefully they've also given you some slides that you can annotate on. That's what we're going to talk about, how to do that well. Okay. Next slide, Maggie, please. Okay. You should have received as registrants for this workshop, this growth mindset, how it's an effect really on academic achievement. But if you kind of look at the prompt or the email on the side to all of you from an instructor. Hopefully no one's doing that to you, but it happens. You know what happens is it sneaks up on you. You go look at your Canvas course site and you're like, oh my gosh, I have this reading due tomorrow. What am I supposed to do now, right? So you're like, oh, I don't have time to read this all word for word. So if you had a few minutes to look it over or not, we're going to kind of speed through this next section so we don't run out of time. So what would I do? Well, for sure, I'd read the abstract, okay, and get an overview of what this article is. But now let's walk through some of the other parts of this, and to do that. Okay, good. Next, Maggie. Okay, so why are we reading and extracting information? Think about any one of your courses, and if you want, feel free to unmic yourself and contribute here in this space. It's a safe space. What do you think? Is there any one of these that are more important to you, or?
I think using the big vocabulary terms is helpful for me.
Okay, thank you, Latifa. Anyone else? Okay.
There are a couple people in the chat saying spacing it out is helpful.
Great. Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. So let's see. Of course, I have the answer on the next slide. So which is most beneficial, right? Actually, it's a mix of everything. So there's multiple things. I know that. So really, but you still are going to say to yourself, but I still don't have time to read every word. And that's realistic. That's reality in life. At this moment, you want to show up to lecture tomorrow or your discussion section and have an understanding of the text. So what can we do with this? I'm going to guide you through some questions I created on that text, and we're going to unpack them a little bit, and then we're going to talk to you about what's called a learning taxonomy. Then maybe once you see it, you can show by a raise of hands if you've seen it before. Okay. Oh, how can I understand? Yes. Okay. So you're going to set goals for your reading, right? If it's to contribute in a discussion or if it's going to be writing a short response, those are some of the things that you need to think about when you're using any one of these decisions about drawing connections to ideas, referring them while writing my own paper, or putting material into my own words. Retention. You know, there's always material for courses that we absolutely have to remember or memorize. And then if you have homework, how am I going to do that? Oh, yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah. The questions and how do I know what should be skimmed or skipped? I'm going to kind of help you with this because we're going to look at the question types, unpack them a little bit, and then go back to the text so that you can kind of hone in on where you can develop a response to the questions. So that's where we're getting to here. Okay. So it is really, how can I understand the paper without reading for word, and vice versa? I have questions and I need to answer them. Okay. Has anyone seen this before? You can raise your hands at all. Yes, some of you have, I see. Okay, great. This is the learning taxonomy. Really what it is trying to help you focus on how do we take information, what are we doing with it, so we really develop a deeper learning with it, and then are able to utilize that information to really be successful, not only in our courses, truly you're emerging experts in the major you chose. When you graduate with the degree, you're attesting that you have a strong foundational knowledge in that area and you can utilize it in the next space that you're going to, whether it's your profession, graduate school, and other spaces. So we're going to use this to take a look at question prompts and then what we would do with that with the paper. This is critical because it also helps you determine what is the expectations that the instructor or a TA has written about in those questions. That's how we're going to use this, okay? Okay, so retention is for memorizing. That's when you know that you have courses that you have to unpack. I believe you said vocabulary. Very important is you're emerging. There's always new vocabulary. Skimming text for new words that you need to really hone, because when you create a writing response, you have to use the language and the discipline. To do that well is utilizing the vocabulary. So that was a great example of extracting information. Moving beyond that, then, you're going to, what I just said, you need to make sure you can explain those vocabulary, explain the concepts using the vocabulary so that it is something that's very comfortable to you. The next piece will be, what am I going to do with this information? How am I going to use it? And that's a question response. It could be a writing assignment. Maggie showed you, even unpacking a thesis statement really is an application. You have to know more about what they're asking you to do in there. And then the next part, where all of you should be striving for all the time with information and material, is analyzing and evaluating. Analyzing is making connections between different parts of information and doing the compare contrast. For example, that thesis prompt that Maggie unpacked with you all, that was a compare contrast. It was asking you to take some information as you researched it, looked it up, compare contrast, then you're going to make the argument or counter argument to the compare contrast. But as you're doing this and doing readings, then that's the deep dive of reading. You need to evaluate and critically examine and make judgments about what information you really need to put into your paper or your homework question. Okay, so that's where we will get you to. Okay, next, Maggie. Yeah. Prioritizing, that's the making judgment, evaluating critical information. Okay, so we'll just go through this. You can bring all the prompts up and I'm write out ideas, mark what information you need to apply to homework or questions, highlight patterns between concepts or differences. Your reactions, if it's a reading for which you're in a course such as what Maggie has shown you in that thesis prompt, how do you feel about a statement in your readings? And we're going to show you an example of this. Okay. Okay, so now I created a little quiz. You have those quiz questions, but we're going to go through this. I think, Maggie, we're going to just have to walk through it a little bit quicker. And I will apologize. Reed, you've had your hand raised for some time. I hope I've said your name correct. Did you want to ask us something? Or I'll say no. Oh, okay. No worries. I just wanted to acknowledge you and apologize. I forgot to do that earlier. Okay. Okay. So we're going to use a quiz type situation, which I'll help you understand how I created the question and then how I can go to the material to start looking at it. Okay. Now the next slide, maybe. Okay. Oh, that's the answer. Okay, what was the data collection method in the paper? Something's, oh, it's all right. We can use that. No worries. Okay. The question is, what's the data collection method for this research study? If you have handy that taxonomy, you will know that it's really asking you for something specific, as if you had to memorize this piece from the paper. This is important in courses for which you need to, or often reading primary sources. How is the study conducted? That's a memorize, that's a remember. So that's for retention. So what are critical things that you think you're going to have to retain? What's the high level pieces from each section of the paper? So you would look at it this way. So the next slide. And explaining that. Okay, so you already know you have to retain it, but then explaining and making understanding. How and why was that the survey, the methodology for that paper? Okay, and the next question. This is asking, what recommendations do you have for future research on mindset and academic achievement? And, we're prompting you to look at, well, if we're looking at future recommendations, we know that there's always limitations. So limitations would be, are they in the survey, the methodology, in the standardized testing that was in the paper? So now where would we find that on the in the paper? Just then going back and looking at the taxonomy. The next slide. So you're evaluating information. You're making a judgment about limitations. Okay, now remind you, I looked at the paper and I'm like, okay, I have to go to my learning taxonomy. What would be a priority for this? How am I prioritizing things? So it's critically examining information as the evaluating. So I'm going to go look at the paper's implications. And that's how I created that question for myself. Then the next part. Interpret the following diagram in the relationship for the study's main findings. We're often doing this too, whether it's STEM or psychology or a sociology course or econ. We're very important to pay attention to graphs. Learning how to read and analyze those solicits information. And then if you look on the taxonomy, you're going to see what level that is of using the information. Okay, so that's the next piece. And then correlational relationships that these authors discovered. We know that there was a strong, you're going to go to the paper and think about, okay, it's a research study. There's outcomes that they're looking for compared to their hypothesis or their thinking about or study question. Go and look for where that relationship is identified. And this is often questions that you're asked in your homework or a lab report or other types of reading. So go look there and you'll find to do this question, you really have to look at the taxonomy and make some critical evaluative judgments around the material so that you're starting to think, oh, okay, they made some judgments then around from the research study. So we could keep going through this. The next part that we'd like to show you, I think is there one more question? Yes. Formulate a theory that explains the relationship between those different categories. So by the word formulate, you're also thinking, and if you see these types of questions in your homework, your questions, and what to go extract from papers, this is really asking you to create and produce something. Okay, and so looking back at the paper to see, okay, what models did they give? How would I would look at the results, I'd look at the graphs that I just had up there and say, okay, I would formulate a relationship that socioeconomic status, it either positively or negatively affects the relationship, and I go look in the paper for that. So we're now looking at keywords and our questions that relate to that learning taxonomy, so you can go back and call the information. And you can see here, it is produce, create. They want you to think out of the box. You have a bunch of information here. How are you going to think? What would you do with it? Okay, so I know we didn't have a lot of time to explore about what your majors are, but you can see how that could be applicable. Okay, and then discuss the study's contribution to literature at large. So again, about the model, the variables that might be in there. And when we go back to the taxonomy again, analyzing information. So you should, when you're looking at a paper, you can go to discrete areas of it and just ask yourself any one of these critical questions. What do I really need to know here? How do I cull information and compare and contrast to information like in the graph? If there's a graph there, it's doing that major work for you, but what's there? What relationship, or what are the items they're trying to draw a relationship to? Okay, so our next step then, there's a reading you have, and often we want to sit down too. Now we have to do a deep dive. We may be doing the actual reading to support what we unpacked from the thesis statement. I'll go back to what Maggie was saying. This is a little different text, but now we actually do have to read word for word, because we're going to create prompts, and this reading might be an article like this. It might be part of the textbook. It could be our own notes, but what are we going to do? We need our own way of note annotating or note making now from these sources. So you see again, new vocabulary. Ask questions about the information that you're noticing in here, especially asking how, why. We just showed how that's important, because you have to do compare and contrast of information. Formulate your own interpretations and summaries from key sections. Pay attention in the reading to evidence that's supporting the claims that are made in the paper. Also, what are your feelings toward it? Do you agree with the claim in the paper? Those are often very critical, and they help you create a stance towards readings and information in your courses, which you don't always have to agree with your professor or your teaching assistant. You have your own voices, hold on to those, but you need to have an argument why you agree or disagree, or the counter arguments to something. Okay, so I'm going to show you now on this. Again, we talked about this. Maggie, you can go through. Just there's some colors here, highlighting concepts, adding your ideas, and I'm going to show you how I used this in a paper to annotate it for myself. I color coded it. I don't know how many people like to use colors. You'll find your own way, but I used these to essentially, if I can go back here for 1 second, I'm going to look up something for us. Okay, so the blue was really to make notations in my own words and or for vocabulary. Okay, so I had vocabulary. I was defining them there in the blue box on your upper right. The orange was a statement that I thought, wow, it's actually very interesting and very important and powerful, and it does sum up quite a bit of this text. On either side are my annotated notes, words and how I interpreted and made meaning from that area of the text. I also know that by doing this and starting to write my own summary, my own wording, those are areas you can go to your instructor office hours, your TA's office hours, you know, a tutor, whoever interacts with this material with you, or even your friend, if you have a study group, and say, here's what I took away from this. How can you help me? Am I on the right track? Is this, you know, helping me develop understanding from this? The pink itself, your reactions. There's a statement in there. It's fairly strong. I do have a disclaimer on this reading. It's so you may not disagree with it. I had a hard time with it, so I wrote that there because I thought, well, I'm going to have to write an assignment to this. I don't think I'm going to agree with the context of this, right? And so I was already formulating and thinking ahead, depending what given my prompt, I wasn't going to agree with the premise of this paper. So this is how I use my annotated notes. You can do the same thing. It becomes a little different with your lecture notes, or you can take the lecture slides and create annotations on them yourself. It's very similar to this. Using the taxonomy helps you to know, I don't want to stay buried in the memorization. And I'm sure you're not that student. You're definitely in your upper division courses. Push yourself to analyze and evaluate. I guarantee you that's where you're at now. You've laid all the foundational pieces by your foundational courses in your prior institution before coming to UC San Diego. Now you need to put that in use as your foundational knowledge and begin to really apply, analyze, and evaluate that information to your new courses. Okay, next slide. Okay, yeah, there's more pieces here. Again, I'm still creating my own annotations. So finding meaning in here. Make yourself answer your own questions. It's a great way to study as you're reading. What question would I ask after I've read a certain amount to help me review in my mind? Write yourself a question, use the taxonomy to create questions at all different levels. Use them as a study guide. You know, spacing your review is also another time management tip, because as you keep using those as reinforcements to your knowledge over time, when you get towards the exam or quiz or writing assignment, you're able to utilize that information quickly. Okay, your retrieval is faster of the information. It helps you decide what's important as you start to extract information and utilize it in different ways. Maybe by comparing and contrasting things, you'll also start to see, oh, maybe those were not such important features. Okay. I'll let Maggie take this over right now.
So we're at the end of our workshop. We know that's a lot of information, so we wanted to just reiterate about the key takeaways. So the plan is to know what and how to read. It's not always about diving in and reading every word. It's really having these different strategies and really forcing yourself to question what you're seeing in the material so that it stays with you longer, right? So what questions can you ask about the material, and what level should you be ready to interact with the material? Sometimes we're not ready to dive right in, right? So give yourself some grace and let yourself ask some questions about the material so that it really stays with you. So another thing is read to learn. So note make at the appropriate level within context. It can feel really like you might be motivated to make notes about every single thing you see. You want to highlight everything, right? But really it helps when you have a plan. Like, I'm only going to make notes right now about what's pops out at me and makes me feel something. I'm only going to make notes right now about vocabulary. I'm only going to make notes right now about summary stuff, right? So come in with a strategy, with a plan, so that you're not just taking everything in and trying to organize it as you go. And review after reading, and then really connect to other material. How does this connect to the rest of the class? How does this reading connect to that writing prompt? How does this reading connect to what my others peers are experiencing as well? Making those connections gives you that context so that the material stays with you not only deeper, but longer. So again, we talked about, like, how are you going to use these two resources, the Writing Hub and Learning Strategist? How would you use them together? So we want to give you an example. So these are the things that you can get from using the two resources, right? Is accountability. We talked about that. But there's something really helpful and productive about meeting and talking with peers who are highly trained to facilitate learning, because it will help cement your own learning. I know Learning Strategists and Writing Hub consultants are highly trained in helping you come up with your own insights. They're not there to tell you what to do. They're there to be like, what do you think about this? What questions can you ask about it? They're there to help you manage your schedule, your courses, your reading. So use the Writing Hub and Learning Strategist to break down your assignments into manageable goals. That's really something that you can take away about what does it mean to manage time? Like, what is a manageable goal for you? So reaching those small goals will help foster a sense of long-term success. It's the thing that'll help keep you going, right? When you know that you have met all these small goals, because they all add up to something bigger. So I'm going to give you an example of how you would use the Learning Strategist and the Writing Hub consultants together. So say you were given that really overwhelming writing prompt that we went over together. So you're assigned that writing, you're like, I don't know what to do. This is for my college writing program. I have no idea where to start. So start with meeting with a Learning Strategist and then set small goals related to that assignment. So you set those small goals for yourself. You go back to your room, your dorm, whatever. You try to map that out for yourself. Come back to the Learning Strategist. Discuss ways that you're tackling it. Reflection is a key part of learning. So we need to take that time to reflect and to dissect what it is and really analyze. Is this working for me? Is this the way to go? Once you do this, go meet with a writing consultant because you're ready to write. When you're ready to write, it doesn't need to be, you don't need to bring a full draft for a tutor to help you. You can just come with ideas. You can just come with a willingness to talk about what it is that interests you. Then you have a second session to revise, because we know that writing is not about doing it one time and it's done. Come back, have some revision, do some editing with the writing consultant. And when it's done, return to that Learning Strategist that you worked with and reflect on the steps that made you successful in that assignment. Kind of like giving yourself time to recount the wins that you have. They're small wins, but they're wins nonetheless. And that's what that's what drives you forward to success, right? Is knowing like I'm set these goals for myself, I accomplished them, and this is the payoff from all of those things. I feel like sometimes as busy students, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a student, but I feel like because you're busy students, you just get caught up in like, I just got to do this thing and I keep going and the quarter's coming and I got to go. That's why we wanted to put this on, because we want you to stop and be like, no, you're doing good things every day. You're making positive steps every day. Take the time to reflect and be like, I did that thing, so I can continue to do it. You know, like, don't just get pummeled. That's my favorite word right now. Don't get pummeled by the pace of the quarter.
Yeah. Also, if I may add, the learning strategist really, there's no limitation on appointments with them. If you feel like you've hit a wall and like, oh my God, I don't think I could squeeze in one more minute of my day, or my weekends, I feel like I'm just working nonstop. They really have great understanding. They are students. It takes me anywhere from 5 months or so to train them. So, and they've worked with material a lot. They know exactly what you're going through. I can say that really wholeheartedly. But as you work with them, and it's not a one-time situation, because they're going to give you strategies, goals, work with your calendar, and then say, okay, try this over this next week or week and a half and come back. That's the accountability that Maggie's talked about earlier. Come back. I mean, we have students that, oh my gosh, things have really changed how I approach any one of the courses, and they're not discipline specific, because a lot of these strategies are transferable, but they will work towards where you're in most need for whichever course or courses. So keep that in mind also.
Yeah. And that takes us to our final takeaways. So what we hope that you take away from this time together is, on the writing portion, is recalibrate the way you think about writing. It's not just a process. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not just a product. It is a process. And no matter what discipline you're in, writing can help you through the thinking process. And I know that whatever major you're in, it's going to require you to think. So writing is going to help you think through. Unpack the expectations around an assignment and break down into steps. I think it's really hard to just take on a writing prompt at face value, because it is really overwhelming. It's where the instructor is telling you everything that you need to do. So look at it and unpack those expectations and try to break down what it means to do each part of the writing process. Assess how much time you think each step will take. Set small, manageable goals. You've talked about that. That creates a sustainable success. And use your resources. People are definitely here to help you manage your schedule, your course load, your assignments. So sometimes it's just about knowing how to use your resources. And that was a big goal of Susan's and mine, was to let's give students tools to really understand how they can use these resources together, not just separately.
And on top of that, setting short goals, even in studying to learn, not studying to cram or to memorize, really helps you find a way to chunk your material in a way that's manageable, and really feel successful when you learn something and like, I got this now. I can move on to the next goal that's manageable. That's the key to all our learning. And as you do that, really it is efficiency, it is time management. Because when you get closer to the exam, that knowledge is staying with you. You have less to keep reviewing over and over again as you're leading up to major products, which are assignments or exams for the courses. Okay. Thank you so much. Here are our web pages. And it's writinghub.ucsd.edu is overall. Anyone, we have their appointments. They've for the WC Online, I know Maggie's area, you can create appointments. There's so many. You can create appointment unless there's really busy assignment times, right up to 5 minutes, I believe, before the appointment. For our learning strategists, you complete a very brief questionnaire as a form. We're looking to know when are your times that you need, that you have in your space. Our learning strategists meet your times. So you're not going to see a plethora of times. We just are collecting information from you. They'll email you back and set up a time that you had put in your window of opening. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to echo Susan's thanks. I know that you don't have to be here. You chose to be here. So we appreciate your time and your attention. We're going to send out a follow-up email just with the key takeaways at the end and links. And we would love your feedback. So we'll also include that link in a follow-up email. I think we've answered all the questions in the chat. We do have a little bit of time, so if anybody has questions, we'll be happy to stick around. Other than that, thank you so much again. We appreciate you being here and hope to see you in one of our services.
Yes.
Thank you.
And remember, your transfer center golden, so don't forget to interact with them often.
This was great. Thank you guys for your time.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, thank you. I'll stop my share.
Oh, I was just sending you a note.
Oh, do you want to stop the recording?